Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The maintenance hatch slammed shut behind Kyle with a metallic clang that echoed through the service corridor like a gunshot. His knees cracked as he straightened. 53 years of gravity and grief etched into every joint. The air recyclers hummed their endless mechanical lullaby, pushing sterile atmosphere through the veins of the Starship Ascendant. He'd been cleaning these corridors for 3 years now, invisible as the dust he swept away. Just another piece of human debris from a dead world. A child's sob cut through the mechanical drone. Kyle froze, his weathered hands tightening on the cart's handle. The sound came from ahead, around the bend where the corridor opened into one of the observation lounges reserved for the ship's elite. He should keep walking, mind his business, stay invisible. But the sound, raw, helpless, utterly alone, pulled at something in his chest that he'd thought had died with everything else. He abandoned his cart and crept forward, pressing his back against the cold bulkhead. Through the transparent aluminum partition, he could see into the lounge. Princess Leia sat cross-legged on the polished floor, her small frame dwarfed by the cavernous space around her. Her skin held that distinctive blue-green tint of the Zakal royal bloodline, but it seemed pale, almost gray in the harsh artificial light. In her lap sat a holographic projector, casting the image of a perfect red apple that flickered and stuttered, its edges dissolving into static before reforming. The projection hiccuped again, revealing the hard metal base beneath the illusion for a split second. That's when the tears came, silent, desperate, the kind of crying that came from deep places where hope went to die. She touched the hologram with one small finger, and her hand passed right through it. Kyle's breath caught in his throat. She was 8 years old. 8. And she was weeping over a toy apple because she'd never seen a real one. Pathetic. The voice cut like a blade across ice. Queen Marana stepped into the lounge, her presence seeming to drain the warmth from the air itself. She moved with predatory grace, each step measured and deliberate. Her own skin held the same blue-green hue as her daughter's, but deeper, richer, the color of deep ocean water under a dying sun. Her eyes, pure white with no visible iris or pupil, fixed on her daughter with cold disapproval. "Your Majesty, Leia scrambled to her feet, wiping frantically at her tears. Crying, over a hologram. Marana's voice carried no emotion, no warmth, no trace of maternal concern. "Is this what my heir has become? A mewling child who weeps over shadows? I'm sorry, Mother. I just what? Just forgot that we are Zakal? That we rule through strength, not sentiment?" Marana gestured dismissively at the hologram. This is exactly the kind of weakness that destroyed the humans. They clung to their precious memories, their useless emotions, while their world burned around them. Kyle's fists clenched involuntarily. The metal bulkhead felt cold against his back, but not as cold as the rage building in his chest. "Pack that away," Marana continued. "The Council of Lords arrives in 1 hour. You will greet them with dignity, not with tear-stained cheeks and fairy tales." "But Mother, enough!" Marana raised her hand, and 2 royal guards stepped forward from the shadows. Kyle hadn't even seen them enter. "Escort Princess Leia to her chambers. See that she's prepared for the reception." The guards moved with mechanical precision, flanking the girl on either side. Leia looked back once at her mother, hope flickering in her dark eyes, but Marana had already turned away. The hologram continued to flicker on the floor, forgotten, its red glow casting dancing shadows on the walls. As the entourage departed, Kyle caught one last glimpse of the princess. She was looking directly at him through the transparent partition, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. There was something in that gaze, a recognition perhaps, or maybe just the desperate need to be seen by someone, anyone, who wouldn't judge her tears. Then she was gone, and Kyle was alone with the abandoned hologram and the weight of what he'd witnessed. Beyond the door lay paradise. The Queen's private arboretum rose before him like a cathedral of green. The dome overhead showed not the void of space, but a projection of blue sky and white clouds, so real that Kyle's eyes watered at the sight. The air smelled of earth and growing things, scents so alien after years of recycled atmosphere that they hit him like a physical blow. Rows of plants filled the space, herbs, flowers, small shrubs, all growing in actual soil. Not the synthetic growing medium used in the ship's food production areas, but real Earth, dark and rich and alive. The plants were all Zakal species, Kyle realized, carefully maintained specimens from their homeworld. All except one. In the center of the dome stood a single tree, no more than 8 feet tall, but perfect in its proportions. Its bark was rough and brown, its branches spreading wide to catch the artificial sunlight. Green leaves rustled in the gentle breeze generated by hidden fans. And hanging from one branch, exactly at eye level, was a single apple. Kyle approached it with the reverence of a pilgrim reaching a shrine. The apple was perfect, red as fresh blood, smooth and unblemished, heavy with juice and promise. His hands trembled as he reached toward it. When his fingers closed around the fruit, it felt warm and solid and impossibly real. The lights blazed on like the wrath of God. I should have known. Kyle spun around, the apple still clutched in his fist. Queen Marana stood in the doorway, no longer wearing her formal robes but dressed in simple dark clothing that made her seem even more intimidating. Her white eyes fixed on the fruit in his hand, then moved to his face, then down to his exposed wrist where a faded tattoo was clearly visible in the harsh light. Dr. Kyle Morrison, she said, and each word fell like a stone into still water. Botanist, former head of Earth's Agricultural Preservation Initiative, survivor of the final evacuation wave. She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the soft earth. Did you think I wouldn't know who you were? Did you think I wouldn't remember the man who helped destroy my husband? Kyle's throat felt like sandpaper. Your husband? Commander Thane, Zakal military liaison to the Human Alliance. He died on your pathetic world, believing in your promises that it could be saved. Her voice remained perfectly calm, but something dangerous flickered behind her eyes. He was leading the evacuation of your precious agricultural preserve when the atmospheric processors failed. The blast killed everyone within 50 kilometers. The apple felt suddenly heavy in Kyle's hand. I remember Commander Thane. He was a good man. He was a fool who died for human sentiment. Marana circled him slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. This tree was his final gift to me. A cutting from your precious earth orchards preserved and nurtured as a memorial to his misguided compassion. I kept it as a reminder of why emotions are weakness. Kyle looked down at the apple, seeing it now for what it truly was. Not just fruit, but a monument to loss, to love, to the crushing weight of might-have-beens. Your daughter, my daughter will not be poisoned by the same sentimentality that killed her father. Marana stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her white eyes. You saw her today, didn't you? Crying over illusions, exactly the kind of pathetic display that I will not tolerate. She's 8 years old. She should be allowed to feel. Feel what? The pain of loss? The agony of hope destroyed? Marana's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her icy composure. Feeling nearly destroyed me. I will not let it destroy her. Kyle straightened, meeting her gaze directly. Maybe destruction isn't always the worst thing. Maybe sometimes you have to break before you can grow into something stronger. Philosophical platitudes from a species that went extinct. Marana raised her communication device to her lips. Security to the Royal Arboretum. Immediate. The security team burst through the wooden door with weapons drawn, 6 Zakal guards in full combat armor, their faces hidden behind dark visors. They surrounded Kyle in seconds, their weapons trained on his center mass. Execute him, Marana said quietly. The detention level of the Ascendant was everything Kyle had expected and worse. The cell was barely large enough for him to lie down, with walls of bare metal and a single flickering light panel overhead. Hours passed, maybe days. Time became meaningless in the windowless space. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, multiple sets moving with military precision. The cell door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, and 6 guards entered, flanking him on all sides. Move, one of them commanded. They marched him through corridors he'd never seen before, deeper into the ship's superstructure. Eventually, they emerged into a vast chamber that took Kyle's breath away. The throne room of the Ascendant was a monument to Zakal power and ambition. The ceiling soared overhead, supported by massive pillars carved from what looked like solid obsidian. And at the far end of the chamber, elevated on a dais of black stone, stood the Judgment Throne. Queen Marana sat in absolute stillness, wearing formal robes of deep purple that seemed to absorb the light around them. Her crown was a simple circlet of dark metal, but it carried the weight of authority like a physical presence. To her right stood Princess Leia, dressed in a smaller version of her mother's robes, her young face carefully composed in an expression of royal neutrality. The guards forced Kyle to his knees at the base of the dais. Between him and the throne sat a small pedestal, and on that pedestal rested the apple he had stolen. Under the harsh lights of the throne room, it seemed almost to glow, a spot of warm color in the cold, geometric space. "Dr. Kyle Morrison," Morana's voice echoed through the chamber, amplified by hidden speakers. "You stand accused of violating the sacred space of the Royal Arboretum, theft of royal property, and attempted corruption of the heir to the Zakal Empire. How do you answer these charges?" Kyle looked up at her, then at Princess Leia. The girl was trying to maintain her composure, but he could see the way her eyes kept drifting to the apple. "Guilty," he said clearly. "On all counts." A murmur ran through the assembled court officials who lined the walls. Morana seemed unsurprised by his answer. "You do not seek mercy? Your daughter already knows about pain," Kyle replied. "I saw her crying over a hologram because she's never experienced anything real. You think you're protecting her by keeping her in a sterile bubble? But all you're doing is teaching her that life isn't worth living." "If that's true, then why did you keep the tree?" Kyle nodded toward the apple. "If sentiment is weakness, if emotion is death, then why preserve the one thing on this ship that serves no practical purpose except to remind you of what you've lost?" For the first time since he'd known her, Queen Morana hesitated. "You kept it because your husband loved it, because it was real and beautiful and connected to something larger than just survival. You kept it because deep down, you know that a life without beauty, without wonder, without hope, isn't really life at all. My husband believed as you do. He believed in hope, in beauty, in preserving life for its own sake. And where did that belief lead him? To a shallow grave on a dead world. He died trying to preserve something worth preserving," Kyle said. "What are you living for?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Princess Leia was staring at Kyle now, her young face filled with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I live for my daughter's future," Morana said finally, "for the continuation of our species. And what happens when you succeed? When you've eliminated every trace of joy or wonder or hope? What will be left to survive?" Morana descended the steps of the dais slowly, her white eyes never leaving Kyle's face. When she reached him, she knelt down so they were at eye level. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, human? I see the face of everyone who failed my husband, everyone who promised salvation and delivered death. And I see someone so afraid of losing what she loves that she's forgotten how to love at all," Kyle replied quietly. Morana's hand moved to the ceremonial blade at her waist, but before she could draw the weapon, another voice cut through the tension. "Mother!" Princess Leia had stepped forward, her small voice somehow commanding the attention of the entire chamber. She looked impossibly young and impossibly brave as she addressed the most powerful being in the known galaxy. "Mother, may I speak?" Morana's hand froze on the blade's hilt. "Leia, return to your position. Please, Mother. I have something to say." For a long moment, mother and daughter stared at each other across the gulf of protocol and power. Finally, Morana nodded once, curtly. "I had a dream last night," Leia said, her voice gaining strength. "I dreamed I was walking through a garden full of apple trees, just like in the stories Father used to tell me. The sun was warm on my face, and I could smell the flowers, and there were birds singing in the branches. And I was so happy, Mother. Happier than I've ever been in real life." Morana's face had gone very still. "Dreams are not real, daughter. But feelings are real, aren't they? The happiness I felt in the dream, that was real. And the sadness I feel every day when I wake up and remember that gardens like that don't exist anymore, that's real too." Leia looked down at the apple on its pedestal. "When I saw this today, I felt something I've never felt before. Hope. Hope is dangerous," what Morana said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "More dangerous than despair?" Leia asked. "Because that's what I live with every day, Mother. Despair. The certainty that nothing will ever be beautiful or wonderful or worth caring about. Is that really the future you want for me?" Kyle watched the interplay between mother and daughter with growing amazement. The child had found the one argument that could penetrate Marana's armor. The universe is cruel, Leah. It will break your heart if you let it. Then let it break, the girl replied with startling fierceness. Let it break and heal and break again, because at least that means I'm alive. At least that means I'm feeling something other than this emptiness. The silence that followed was broken by an alarm, a piercing wail that echoed through the chamber and sent the court officials into immediate panic. Red lights began flashing along the walls, and the ship's intercom crackled to life. Medical emergency on Deck 7. All available medical personnel to Deck 7 immediately. But it wasn't just one alarm. As the first died away, another began. Then another. Then another. Until the entire ship seemed to be screaming in electronic distress. Queen Marana was already moving, striding toward the chamber's communication console. Report, she commanded as her communications officer appeared on the screen. Your Majesty, we have a medical crisis spreading throughout the ship. The victims are losing the will to live. Their skin is turning gray, and they're simply fading away. Kyle felt ice form in his veins as the implications hit him. How many affected? Marana demanded. Current count is over 200 and rising, Your Majesty. She stopped mid-sentence, her white eyes widening in horror. Kyle followed her gaze to Princess Leia, who was standing exactly where she had been moments before. But something was terribly wrong. The girl's natural blue-green skin tone was fading, taking on a sickly gray pallor that made her look like a shadow of herself. Leia? Marana's voice was barely a whisper. The princess looked down at her hands, watching with apparent fascination as the color drained from her flesh like water running out of a basin. She swayed slightly on her feet, catching herself against the pedestal that held the stolen apple. Mother, she said, and her voice was already growing weak, I don't feel very well. Kyle watched in mounting horror as the gray fading claimed its youngest victim. The condition seemed to accelerate in Leah, her skin growing paler by the moment, her movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated. Marana caught her daughter as the girl's legs gave out, cradling her against her chest with desperate tenderness. Get me the chief medical officer, she commanded, her voice cracking with barely controlled panic. The communication screen flickered, and Dr. Vex appeared, an elderly Zakal, whose own skin was beginning to show the early signs of the gray fading. Your Majesty, the condition appears to be genetic. Our people are losing their connection to life itself, as if our very essence is becoming unstable. Kyle leaned forward, his mind racing. Doctor, what would happen if the affected individuals were exposed to a complex organic environment? Living soil? Plants? Microorganisms? Well, theoretically, exposure to a living ecosystem might provide the triggers necessary to stabilize the condition, but we don't have anything like that aboard the Ascendant. Kyle's heart began to race. Your Majesty, the Arboretum, the soil there isn't synthetic, it's real earth. And the plants, they're creating exactly the kind of ecosystem the doctor described. Marana looked down at her daughter, whose breathing had become shallow and labored. Then unseal it, she said urgently. Let me help. If there's any chance they could help your daughter. Why? Marana's white eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. Why would you help the people who are about to execute you? Kyle looked at Princess Leia, so small and fragile in her mother's arms. Because she deserves better than the world we've given her. Marana stared at him for a long moment, weighing his words against years of accumulated mistrust and pain. Finally, she stood, still cradling her daughter in her arms. Release him, she commanded the guards, and escort us to the Arboretum. All speed. The journey to the royal quarter felt like a descent into hell. Every corridor they passed was filled with Zakal showing various stages of the gray fading. The ship's medical personnel moved frantically between patients, but their faces showed the hopelessness of their situation. They reached the Arboretum to find the wooden door sealed with an electronic lock. As the barriers disengaged and the door swung open, Kyle was struck once again by the almost overwhelming richness of the space beyond. Marana laid her daughter gently on a bed of soft moss near the apple tree, then stepped back to watch Kyle work. He knelt beside the girl, checking her pulse and breathing, then looked up at the Queen with grim determination. I need to create a more complex ecosystem, something that will provide maximum biological diversity. The soil here is good, but it's too clean. Life isn't organized. It's chaotic, messy, interconnected. He began working with frantic efficiency, his hands moving through the earth with the skill of someone who had spent decades coaxing life from hostile environments. I need organic waste, decomposing matter, anything that will introduce beneficial bacteria into the soil. The ship's waste processing systems sterilize everything. Then we make our own. Kyle pulled off his work gloves and pressed his bare hands deep into the soil around the apple tree's roots. Blood, skin cells, sweat, anything living that can seed the environment with biological diversity. That's barbaric. That's life, Kyle replied grimly. Your Majesty, I need you to help me. Touch the soil. Get your hands dirty. Marana recoiled as if he'd asked her to poison herself. I am Zakal royalty. I do not... You are a mother, Kyle interrupted, and your daughter is dying. For a moment, Kyle thought she would refuse. Then Princess Leia let out a small, pained breath, and something broke in Marana's carefully controlled expression. She knelt beside Kyle and plunged her hands into the soil. The earth was warm and alive beneath their fingers. As their skin made contact with the soil, Kyle could feel the subtle chemical exchanges beginning, their bodies contributing organic compounds, the fundamental building blocks of a living ecosystem. It's working, Kyle said quietly, watching as the soil around their hands seemed to darken and enrich itself. They worked in tense silence. Kyle found himself sharing the space with the most powerful being in the known galaxy, both of them reduced to the fundamental act of trying to preserve life. Why do you care so much? Marana asked suddenly. Your species and mine have been at war for generations. Why risk everything to save a Zakal child? Kyle looked down at Princess Leia, her gray face peaceful in unconsciousness. Because she reminds me of someone I used to be, before I learned that caring too much could break you. Marana was quiet for a long time, her hands moving rhythmically through the soil. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than Kyle had ever heard it. Thane used to say that love wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about deciding that some things were worth the risk of being hurt. She paused. I thought he was naive. I thought his death proved me right. Maybe it just proved that loss is the price of love. Doesn't make the love any less real. Princess Leia stirred slightly, a small sound escaping her lips. Both Kyle and Marana froze, watching her face intently. The gray pallor seemed perhaps a shade less severe. Kyle looked around the arboretum, his mind racing through possibilities. The apple he had stolen sat where Marana had placed it, forgotten in the crisis. But it wasn't just a piece of fruit. It was a seed vessel containing the genetic blueprint for an entire ecosystem. The apple, he said urgently. Your daughter needs to eat it. Marana looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. What? The fruit contains enzymes, organic compounds, genetic markers that her body recognizes from evolutionary memory. It's a biological trigger, a way to remind her cells how to function in harmony with living systems. Kyle retrieved the fruit, its red skin seeming to glow in the warm light of the dome. Your Majesty, the choice is yours. Marana stared at the fruit for a long moment, then at her daughter's pale face. When she looked back at Kyle, her white eyes were filled with something he'd never seen there before. Hope, terrible and beautiful and fragile. If this kills her, then I'll face whatever punishment you think I deserve. But if we do nothing, she dies anyway. Marana took the apple with trembling hands, then carefully lifted her daughter's head. Princess Leia's eyes fluttered open at the touch, unfocused but aware. Mother, she whispered. I'm here, darling. Marana took the apple in both hands, her fingers trembling as she brought it to her mouth. She bit down carefully, working the flesh with her teeth until it became soft pulp. Seconds passed, then minutes. Kyle and Marana knelt in the soil beside the girl, watching for any sign of change. The ship's alarms continued to wail in the distance. Then so gradually that Kyle almost missed it, color began to return to the girl's cheeks. Not the gray pallor of the fading, but her natural blue-green skin tone, warm and alive and beautiful. Her breathing deepened, and her eyes began to focus with increasing clarity. Mother, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in hours. I feel different. Princess Leia sat up slowly, her movements fluid and controlled. But as she rose, something extraordinary began to happen. The soil around her seemed to pulse with energy, and the plants nearest to her began to respond, leaves turning toward her as if she were a source of light, roots extending in her direction, the very air shimmering with some kind of biological resonance. Leah? Marana reached toward her daughter, then stopped in amazement. Where the girl's feet touched the earth, small flowers were beginning to bloom. Not Zakal species, but something entirely new, a hybrid that pulsed with vibrant life. The princess looked down at her hands, then up at Kyle and her mother. Her eyes, formerly the pure white of Zakal royalty, now held flecks of green and gold, as if plant life were growing within them. I can feel them, she whispered in wonder. All the plants, all the living things, they're singing. Kyle stared in amazement as Princess Leia stood and walked toward the apple tree. At her approach, the tree began to change. New buds appearing on its branches, its trunk growing visibly thicker, its roots spreading outward through the soil. Where her hands touched the bark, new fruit began to form, apples in various stages of development appearing as if by magic. What's happening to her? Marana asked, her voice filled with awe and fear. Evolution, Kyle breathed. The apple didn't just heal her, it awakened something that was already there. Princess Leia turned to face them, and Kyle could see that the change went far deeper than just her physical appearance. There was a wisdom in her eyes now that seemed far beyond her 8 years. The gray fading isn't a disease, she said, her words causing the very air to shimmer. It's a hunger. Our people have been starving, not for food, but for connection, for life. She gestured toward the plants around them, which were now responding to her presence like iron filings to a magnet. We were never meant to live in sterile isolation. We were meant to be part of something larger. The sound of running footsteps in the corridor outside interrupted the moment. Commander Zarek burst through the wooden entrance, his face flushed with exertion and something that looked like barely controlled panic. Your Majesty, he gasped, you need to come immediately. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. We're losing crew members by the dozen. Marana rose smoothly to her feet. Commander, as you can see, we have made progress. Zarek's eyes took in the transformed arboretum, the enhanced plant growth, the flowers blooming around Princess Leia's feet, the obvious signs that something fundamental had changed. His expression shifted from relief to something else. Suspicion. Your Majesty, what exactly has happened here? Princess Leia appears to be different. She's been healed, Marana said carefully. Healed or transformed? Zarek's hand moved unconsciously to the weapon at his side. The princess doesn't look entirely Zakal anymore. Kyle felt tension coiling in his muscles as he recognized the shift in Zarek's tone. Commander, explain yourself, Marana commanded. Your Majesty, the condition is genetic, concentrated in the royal family due to generations of careful breeding. Zarek's words came faster now. If the princess has been altered by exposure to alien influences, she could be carrying contamination. Alien influences? Kyle stepped forward. Commander, I used natural soil and organic processes to... Exactly, Zarek interrupted, his weapon now openly drawn. Human contamination, genetic pollution introduced by an enemy of our species. Princess Leia moved closer to her mother, the plants around her feet rustling ominously. Commander Zarek, you don't understand. The healing isn't contamination, it's awakening. Our people don't need awakening, Zarek replied, his voice growing harder. They need purification. The fading is natural selection. It's purging the weak from our species, eliminating those who cling to outdated biological dependencies. Kyle's blood ran cold. You knew. You knew what was causing the fading, and you did nothing. The fading is evolution. Those who survive will be stronger, purer, more capable of thriving in the sterile perfection of space. You're talking about genocide, Marana said, her voice deadly quiet. I'm talking about the future. The Zakal Empire doesn't need subjects who dream of gardens. It needs warriors. And if your evolution kills my daughter, Zarek's expression hardened, then the bloodline needed to end anyway. Your Majesty, you've been compromised. The princess has been contaminated. For the good of the Empire, both of you need to be contained. More footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, multiple sets, moving with military precision. Through the wooden door came a squad of armed soldiers, their weapons drawn and ready. Surround the contaminated area, Zarek commanded. No one leaves until the situation is contained. Queen Marana moved to stand beside her daughter. Commander Zarek, you are relieved from duty for treason against the royal family. Your Majesty, you are no longer competent to command. Princess Leia must be quarantined, and the human must be eliminated. Kyle felt the familiar weight of failure settling on his shoulders. But Princess Leia wasn't finished. The girl raised her hand, and every plant in the arboretum responded. Not just growing now, but moving with purposeful intelligence. Vines snaked around the soldiers' ankles, causing them to stumble. Branches swept down to knock weapons from their hands. The very air became thick with pollen that made the intruders cough and wheeze. "Stand down," Zarek ordered, but his voice was lost in the growing cacophony of rustling leaves and creaking wood. "This is what we could become," Princess Leia called out, her voice somehow audible despite the chaos. Not weak, not contaminated, evolved, connected, alive. One of the soldiers, a young Zakal showing early signs of the gray fading, lowered his weapon and stared at the girl in wonder. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It's an abomination," Zarek snarled, struggling against the vines now holding him firmly in place. "No," Queen Marana said, her voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "It's everything we were meant to be." She moved to stand beside Kyle. "Commander Zarek, I am removing you from command. Any soldier who continues to follow your orders will be charged with treason." The young soldier who had first lowered his weapon stepped forward. "Your Majesty, how can we be healed?" Princess Leia smiled, expression of pure joy that seemed to make the very air shimmer. "The same way the earth heals itself, by remembering that we're all connected." She gestured toward the apple tree, now heavy with fruit. "Take one. Share it with your squad mates. Let the healing spread." The young Zakal approached the tree with reverence, his hands shaking as he reached for one of the perfect red fruits. As his fingers closed around it, Kyle could see color beginning to return to his pale features. "Don't listen to her," Zarek screamed from his prison of vines. "The contamination will spread." "This isn't contamination," the soldier replied quietly, taking a bite of the apple. The change was immediate, not just the return of his natural skin tone, but something deeper, a vitality, a connection to the life around him. "This is coming home." One by one, the other soldiers followed suit. Each who ate from the tree underwent the same transformation. Not just healing, but evolution, awakening to possibilities they had never imagined. Queen Marana looked at Kyle, her white eyes now touched with the same green-gold flecks as her daughter's. "Dr. Morrison, I owe you an apology, and a debt I can never repay." Kyle shook his head, overwhelmed. "Your Majesty, I was just trying to help." "You gave us more than that," Princess Leia said, moving to take his hand. "You gave us back ourselves." Around them, the arboretum had been transformed into something that belonged to no single world. The plants had grown and intertwined in ways that created new species, new possibilities. The soldiers moved among the vegetation with easy familiarity, their enhanced senses allowing them to interact with the living systems in ways that would have been impossible before. "What happens now?" Kyle asked. "Now we heal the ship," Queen Marana said. "We share what we've learned with every Zakal aboard the Ascendant. We plant gardens in every corridor, every room. We remember what it means to be alive." She approached Zarek, her expression thoughtful. "Commander, you have a choice. Accept the healing and join us, or remain as you are. Isolated, sterile, afraid." "I will never accept contamination," Zarek spat. "Then you'll be the last of your kind," Marana said sadly. "The last representative of what we used to be, before we remembered how to live." She turned away from him, dismissing him completely. Kyle watched her with growing amazement. This was not the same woman who had sentenced him to death. The ice-cold authority was still there, but it was now tempered with something warmer. "Your Majesty," Kyle said carefully, "what about the rest of the ship? Thousands are still affected." Princess Leia smiled, her eyes bright with possibility. "It doesn't have to be just one tree." Watch, she moved to one of the soldiers who had eaten from the tree. Where his hands touched the walls of the arboretum, new growth began to appear. Not just random vegetation, but organized, purposeful life. The beginnings of a garden. "The healing doesn't stop with us," the girl explained. "Everyone who accepts the change becomes a carrier. We can transform the entire ship, one room at a time." Kyle felt something he hadn't experienced since Earth died. Genuine hope. Not the desperate kind that clung to impossible dreams, but steady, sustainable hope that came from seeing real change beginning. Over the hours that followed, the transformation of the Ascendant began. Kyle found himself working alongside Queen Marana and her soldiers, helping to distribute fruit from the ever-producing apple tree, teaching the newly awakened Zakal how to create living spaces throughout the ship. Room by room, corridor by corridor, the sterile environment gave way to something alive and growing. The medical crisis passed as if it had never existed. The gray fading simply ceased once the Zakal reconnected with their biological heritage. Dr. Vex, himself transformed and revitalized, worked with Kyle to understand the change. "Remarkable," the elderly physician said, his own eyes now bright with green-gold flecks. "The genetic modifications aren't random. They're purposeful, directed toward increased biological integration. Your species and ours are more compatible than anyone imagined." "Not just compatible," Princess Leia added. "Complementary. Humans understand growth and adaptation. Zakal understands structure and organization. Together, we can create something neither species could achieve alone." Kyle looked around the transformed arboretum, now expanded into adjacent rooms and spreading throughout the royal quarter. Everywhere he saw evidence of the new partnership. Zakal soldiers tending gardens with natural patience, human refugees working alongside their former captors to create living spaces that served everyone's needs. It wasn't paradise. There were still tensions, still conflicts. Some Zakal, like Zarek, refused the transformation entirely and had to be isolated in the remaining sterile sections. But for the first time since Earth had died, Kyle felt like he was part of something growing rather than just surviving. Queen Marana found him as he was helping to plant a new garden in what had once been a storage bay. Her royal robes had been replaced by practical work clothes, and her hands were as dirty with soil as his own. "Dr. Morrison," she said, "we need to discuss your status aboard this vessel." Kyle straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Your Majesty, you saved my daughter's life. You saved all our lives. The debt I owe you cannot be measured. I was just doing what needed to be done." "No," Marana said firmly. "You were doing what you chose to do, despite every reason to leave us to our fate. You could have stayed silent, could have let us all die, could have taken your revenge. Instead, you chose compassion." She paused, looking around at the bustling garden where Zakal and human worked side by side. "I have a proposal for you. I want you to serve as my prince consort, as partner in rule, as guardian of this new world we're building together. Will you help me lead our people into this new era?" Kyle stared at her, speechless. The woman who had sentenced him to death was now offering him a place at her side in ruling an interstellar empire. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified." "You're qualified by your actions," Princess Leia said, appearing at her mother's side. "You're qualified by your heart. You're qualified by your willingness to care about people who had given you every reason to hate them." Kyle looked from mother to daughter, seeing in their faces the same hope and determination that he felt growing in his own chest. The future spreading out before them was uncertain, full of challenges and complications, but it was also alive with possibility. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, I'll help you build this new world." Queen Marana smiled, the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her, and extended her hand. Kyle took it, feeling the warmth of her skin and the slight tremor that betrayed her own nervousness about the path they were choosing. Princess Leia placed her small hand on top of theirs, and Kyle could feel the life force that flowed through her, the connection to every growing thing on the ship. Where their hands touched, a small flower began to bloom. Not Zakal, not human, but something entirely new, something that belonged to the future they were creating together. "To new beginnings," Marana said. "To growth," Kyle replied. "To life," Princess Leia added, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the garden around them. Around them, the transformed Ascendant hummed with the sound of a billion growing things, a symphony of life that had replaced the sterile mechanical drone Kyle had lived with for 3 years. In the corridors beyond, Zakal and humans worked together to tend gardens that stretched throughout the ship, creating a living world within the metal walls that carried them between the stars. It wasn't the ending Kyle had imagined when he first reached for that forbidden apple. It was something far more complex, far more challenging, and infinitely more alive. As he stood with his hand joined to those of the two most important people in his new world, Kyle felt something he had thought lost forever. The certainty that tomorrow would be better than today, and that the day after would be better still. The seeds they had planted together would grow into something magnificent. The seeds they had planted together would grow into something magnificent.